Welcome back to True Echo, where real stories echo louder than fiction. Tonight, we take you on a journey deep into the American South. A bankrupt black farmer, a runaway millionaire heiress, and a secret powerful enough to dismantle a corporate empire. This isn't just a story of betrayal or justice. It's about two strangers from opposite worlds whose paths crossed by fate, and together they changed everything. The Alabama sun had barely dipped behind the trees, staining the sky orange when Jeremiah Carter's rusted-out pickup truck rolled to a slow stop along the shoulder of Highway 84. He didn't stop because he was in a hurry. Quite the opposite. He'd run out of places to go. The foreclosed sign now hung crookedly on what used to be Carter Family Farms, a legacy spanning 3 generations now reduced to dust and debt. Jeremiah stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the oil-stained shirt he'd worked in since morning. He was changing a tire when 3 black SUVs pulled up from nowhere like ghosts from the piney woods. Out stepped 3 men all in black suits. No badges. No names. Their eyes scanned Jeremiah not with curiosity, but with condescension. The tallest one leaned in toward the driver's window. "You seen a young blonde pass through here? Might have asked for directions. She's in trouble." Jeremiah calmly rested his hands on the hood, letting the evening breeze roll across his face. "Just me out here," he said. "Changing a tire." They didn't believe him. He could tell by the way they stared, not at his words but at his skin. But after a few long, uncomfortable seconds, the trio turned and disappeared back into the woods. Only after the last SUV engine faded did he hear it. A faint voice from the back of his truck. "Are they gone?" He froze. Slowly he turned to the truck bed. The tailgate creaked open from inside and a young white woman, blonde hair matted with dirt, designer hoodie caked in sweat and mud, peeked out with wild, alert eyes. "Thank you," she said breathlessly, clutching a silver USB drive in her fist. "I don't know what would have happened if you turned me over." Jeremiah blinked, unsure if he was seeing a ghost or a movie scene gone off script. He'd seen some strange things in his lifetime. Livestock births, tornado warnings, white bankers telling black farmers how to modernize. But a billionaire's daughter hiding in his truck bed? That was new. "Who the hell are you?" he finally asked. She stepped down onto the road, trembling, then raised her chin as if she knew the answer wouldn't land easy. "My name is Emily Winters. And I'm running from my father." Jeremiah stared. The name struck him like lightning. Douglas Winters, CEO of Winters Global. The man who'd bankrupted half the black farms in the South, including Jeremiah's own. A man who wrapped corporate theft in shiny tech slogans and called it market disruption. And standing in front of Jeremiah now was his only daughter, dirty, scared, and holding a silver drive that could change everything. Jeremiah didn't speak for several seconds. He simply stood there on the side of the dirt road, eyes locked on Emily like she was some ghost from the past wrapped in sweat and secrets. She looked nothing like the pristine images from glossy magazines or TV specials where Douglas Winters paraded her as the next face of ethical capitalism. Now she was just a girl with scraped knees and trembling hands, clutching the only thing she had left, truth. "You say you're running from your father?" Jeremiah asked quietly, like the words might shatter the air if spoken too loud. Emily nodded, then held up the small silver USB. "Everything he's done, bribes, land seizures, price fixing, laundering through government contracts, it's all in here. And they'll kill me before they let it go public." Jeremiah's lips tightened. He glanced toward the trees, half expecting those men in black suits to reappear at any moment. "And you brought all that, to a bankrupt farmer with a busted truck?" "No," she said softly. "I didn't mean to bring it anywhere. I just ran. You stopped. That's all." But it wasn't just that, and they both knew it. Jeremiah had every reason to hand her over. After all, this girl was the heiress to the same empire that had chewed up his land, spat out his legacy, and left his father to die in a powerless farmhouse during the winter freeze. But something deeper kept him still. Maybe the way she looked more ashamed than afraid, maybe the clarity in her eyes that said she was done pretending. "Get in," he muttered. Emily hesitated. "You'll help me?" "I'm not helping you," he said, opening the passenger door. "I'm helping the truth. And maybe, just maybe, I'm helping myself." As they pulled away from the side of the road, Jeremiah's mind raced. The engine groaned beneath them as they turned off the main highway and headed toward the hills. There was a place, an old hunting cabin built by his grandfather's generation, deep in the forest, long since abandoned by everyone except the ghosts of hardworking men. No cell towers. No lights. No eyes. He said little as they drove. Emily clutched the USB tight, eyes flicking between the dark woods and the dashboard. I don't want sympathy, she said suddenly, voice thin. But I couldn't stay part of what he's built. I saw what he did to the co-op in Clark County. Black-owned, thriving, until he pulled the contracts and the banks foreclosed on them. Just like yours. Jeremiah's hands gripped the steering wheel. He didn't reply. Emily continued, voice heavier now. I thought I could change it from the inside. I had access, family-level codes. No logs, no firewalls. He trusted me. That was his mistake. Access to what? Jeremiah asked. Field Zero, she whispered. A full-scale strategy to wipe out all independent Southern agricultural operations. Minority-owned farms especially. Your name was on the list. Jeremiah hit the brakes so hard the truck skidded, kicking up gravel. Emily jolted forward, catching herself against the dashboard. He turned toward her slowly, the darkness outside wrapping the cab like a shroud. My name. She nodded, tears springing to her eyes. They called you a medium-risk asset. Said you had too much pride to partner with Winter's distribution. So they made you the first test subject. Pull the warehouse contracts, pressure the banks, adjust the seed pricing model. They dismantled your life like a spreadsheet. For a long time, the only sound was the engine idling and the wind rustling through the pine trees. Then slowly Jeremiah eased his foot back onto the gas. You got a lot of nerve bringing this to me, he said. I didn't mean to, she replied. But I'm glad I did. They arrived at the cabin just before midnight. The old wooden house sat deep within the tree line, draped in moss and memory. Jeremiah pushed the door open, coughing at the musty air, and fumbled to reconnect the solar generator stored beneath the porch. Inside, under the flickering light of a single bulb, Jeremiah cleared the dusty table and set down his old laptop. Emily handed him the USB. He stared at it for a long moment, then plugged it in. The screen lit up. Folders appeared. Internal emails. Judge payments. Field Zero strategy. Blacklisted farms. Jeremiah clicked on the last one. A spreadsheet opened. Names, addresses, threat levels, manipulation dates. Line 43, Carter Family Farms. Notes read, ready for displacement Q3. No viable resistance expected. He stood up so fast the chair screeched backward. His jaw clenched. His father had died believing it was just bad luck. His uncle moved to Georgia thinking it was just the market. But it wasn't. It had been calculated, scheduled, approved. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather notebook. I've documented everything. The bribes. The fake shell companies. Offshore transfers. But we can't just publish it. The system's too strong. We need someone who can verify this without getting us killed. Jeremiah nodded slowly. I know someone. And with that, the war began. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the cracked shutters of the old cabin, casting thin golden lines across the worn floorboards. Jeremiah stood by the window, staring out into the forest, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The weight of what Emily had shown him the night before hadn't lessened. It had only calcified. He didn't say much as he sipped his black coffee. Emily sat at the table, still in the same dirt-caked clothes, though she looked different now. Not cleaner, not calmer, but sharper. More focused. The girl who had run through the woods terrified was now drawing diagrams, maps, and connection trees of Winters Global's corruption on the back of old utility bills Jeremiah had found under the sink. Savannah King, Jeremiah finally said, breaking the silence. She's the only person I trust with this. Emily looked up. Who's Savannah? A lawyer. Harvard grad. Could have worked anywhere, but she came back south. Helped black farmers file a class action lawsuit when the warehouse fees tripled overnight. No one won, but she fought anyway. They blacklisted her. Tried to smear her in the press. But she kept fighting. Emily nodded slowly. Sounds like someone we need. Jeremiah pulled out his old phone. The screen was cracked. The corners held together by electrical tape. He hesitated. There was a number saved in that phone, a number he'd deleted and retyped 3 times over the years. Her number. He dialed. It rang for nearly a minute before a tired voice answered. Savannah King. Savannah, it's Jeremiah Carter. Silence. Then, my God. Jeremiah, I thought they broke you. Where have you been? Off the grid. Listen. I don't have time to explain everything. But I'm holding internal data, evidence of sabotage, bribery, financial fraud. From Winters Global. Names, files, everything. Another silence. Where are you? She asked, her voice suddenly alert. A cabin in Monroe County. It's not safe to say more over the phone. But I'm not alone. Who else is with you? Jeremiah paused. Emily Winters. The silence this time was heavier. Douglas's daughter? Savannah said slowly. She's the one who brought me the drive. Savannah let out a low whistle. You're playing with fire, Carter. That girl's either your salvation or your funeral. I know, he said. But I believe her. Another long pause. I'll come tonight, Savannah said. But understand something. If we go down this road, there's no coming back. I'm not planning to. That night, Savannah's Jeep rolled up through the woods like a ghost from a better time. She stepped out in a long coat, boots caked in red dust, and a briefcase slung over one shoulder. Her eyes were sharp, her presence quiet but forceful. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a blade forged in injustice. Inside, Emily stood up nervously as Savannah entered. You're the daughter, Savannah said, not offering a handshake. Emily nodded. Yes. You came here to undo your father's empire? I came here to undo my silence, Emily replied, standing her ground. Jeremiah watched the two women study each other like chess players. Savannah placed her briefcase on the table, pulled out a legal pad and a worn laptop, then turned to Jeremiah. Let's see what you've got. They reviewed the folders together: bribery payments, offshore accounts, internal memos, and the Field Zero strategy. Savannah's face changed with every click. This, she whispered. This could bring down half of Wall Street. Emily added, there's more. I couldn't access all of it. The rest is stored on Winters Global's core server, only accessible through their internal network. Savannah looked up. Then we need a ghost. Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. A what? A ghost in the machine. Someone who knows how to bypass surveillance, connect us to the core system from inside, and disappear before they're caught. Emily hesitated. Do we know someone like that? Savannah leaned back. I might. And that's how they decided to bring in Raymond Liu, a former NSA analyst, cyber expert, and one of the only men who ever came close to exposing Winters Global 5 years ago, before he was framed, blacklisted, and forced to vanish off the digital map. I hope he's still alive, Savannah muttered. Alive, Jeremiah said, and willing to help. They spent the next 24 hours preparing. Savannah drafted a shadow lawsuit that could be filed with 3 separate courts and emailed to 5 major news outlets the moment the evidence went public. Emily compiled a list of internal access points in Winters Global headquarters: Chicago, 42nd floor, server room B. Jeremiah went into town to buy burner phones, a new battery for the truck, and hardware for a signal scrambler. That night, Savannah made the call. A number so encrypted she had to dial it from a laptop using a military-grade VPN tunneling protocol. The voice that answered was calm. Name. Savannah King. Boss. Code. She entered a 4-digit phrase that sounded like nonsense. Then came the reply. You need a ghost? We need a war. The voice didn't respond immediately. Then, send coordinates. I'll be there by sunrise. Raymond Liu arrived at dawn in a dusty matte black SUV with no plates and windows tinted darker than the truth he'd spent 5 years trying to escape. He stepped out quietly, mid-40s, lean frame, worn leather jacket, and eyes that had seen betrayal from behind both a keyboard and a courtroom. No greetings. No handshake. He entered the cabin, glanced at Jeremiah, then Emily, and finally Savannah. So this is the fire y'all decided to light, he said flatly, dropping a duffel bag onto the floor with a thud. Out spilled cables, flash drives, satellite scramblers, and something that looked dangerously close to military hardware. Emily looked uneasy. You were NSA? She asked. Until they decided truth was a liability, he replied, already booting up a heavily modified laptop. They sold me to your father in exchange for silence. But I didn't stay bought. Savannah stepped forward. We need you to do more than dig through emails. We need to access the Winters core network. Validate the data in the USB, connect to the primary server, and make it public before they know we're even there. Raymond didn't flinch. I'll need 2 things, complete family-level access, and a chance to disappear once this is done. You'll have both, Emily said without hesitation. He paused, then added with a half-smile, your father must be having a meltdown. He's activated red level, Emily replied. Surveillance systems in 6 states, Black Ops diplomatic handlers, and worst of all, Cole Vance. Raymond froze. Cole Vance is back? Jeremiah, standing by the window, turned. You know him? Raymond nodded slowly. He's not security. He's an eraser. Trained for silent extractions. No ID, no questions. If Cole's involved, we're on borrowed time. That night they planned the infiltration. Raymond spread out a blueprint of Winters Global's Chicago headquarters across the table, the corners held down by mugs and wrenches. Emily pointed to the 42nd floor. This is where the internal servers are kept. The only place where data from the USB can be validated by the root certificate. Once it's synced inside the system, it's permanent. No denial. No deletion. Even if they kill us. Raymond added, we'll need a timed release system. I'll clone the data, spread it across 3 anonymous servers in Estonia, Brazil, and Iceland. That way if we're cut off or caught, the data still detonates. Savannah stood up. I'll file the lawsuit the moment the system goes live. Send copies to federal watchdogs, class action lawyers, and independent media. Even if the courts try to shut us down, the world will already know. Jeremiah's face was hard as granite. And I'll get us inside. Emily looked at him. How? I'll pose as a supplier, technical support for the lighting grid during the merger press conference. You'll be registered as a new assistant. I already know how the guard schedules work. I worked in that building years ago before they turned it into a fortress. Savannah nodded. And I'll be outside coordinating with the press. They moved quickly. Emily forged internal ID passes using old access codes her father never thought to revoke. Raymond uploaded burner routes into the GPS to evade traffic cams. Jeremiah sold the last remaining relic of his family farm, his father's old John Deere tractor, to fund the gear. He didn't flinch. He only said, it once plowed 30 acres on a single tank. It deserves better than rust. As the final plan came together, something shifted in the cabin. It was no longer a place of refuge. It was a command center. The air grew taut. No jokes. No smiles. Just silence and purpose. That night, while the others worked, Emily stood outside on the porch, staring at the moonlight filtering through the trees. She pulled the wool blanket around her shoulders, the same one Jeremiah had handed her the night she crawled out of his truck. Jeremiah joined her quietly, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. You cold? No, she said, just thinking. He sat beside her, the wood creaking beneath his weight. You know, she whispered, I used to think power came from money. That influence was earned with handshakes and stock options. Jeremiah didn't speak. Emily turned to him. But you had nothing. No land. No title. No lawyers. And still, you became the one person my father never saw coming. He sipped his tea slowly. You want to know what real power is? She nodded. It's standing up for something even when nobody's watching. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when it costs you everything. A long pause passed between them. You could have turned me in, she whispered. Collected the reward. Shook hands with the devil and walked away. I thought about it, Jeremiah admitted. Not for the money. For the peace. But then I thought about my daughter. Grace, 6 years old. Loves popcorn and catching lightning bugs. Emily's eyes softened. I want her to grow up in a world where men like your father don't decide who deserves land and who deserves to disappear. Emily's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She simply said, then let's burn the whole damn house down. They sat together until the tea went cold. And somewhere in the Chicago skyline, preparations were underway for the most anticipated press conference of the year, Winters Global's $3 billion acquisition of Garner Technologies. What they didn't know was that a data bomb had been wired into the building. And the detonator had blonde hair, tired eyes, and the last name Winters. Chicago's skyline glittered like the crown of a kingdom that had never been challenged. Billboards screamed corporate mantras. Innovation. Integrity. Impact. As if they could whitewash the sins buried beneath boardroom floors. Inside the Granville Convention Center, preparations buzzed like a well-oiled machine. VIPs, investors, media figures, and political operatives were pouring in for the grand event. Winters Global's acquisition of Garner Technologies. On paper it was a merger of 2 tech giants. In reality, it was Douglas Winters' final move to consolidate data power across every agricultural, government, and defense sector. A chokehold disguised as progress. And hidden among the staff and crowd were the 4 people who had come to blow it all up. Emily Winters adjusted the earpiece in her ear as she walked briskly down the hall in a gray blazer and black slacks. She looked the part, confident, composed, invisible. Her forged badge labeled her as a technical media assistant for Garner Technologies. Emily, confirm visual access to port A9, came Raymond's voice through her earpiece. She scanned the control booth at the side of the main auditorium and nodded, keeping her expression blank. Confirmed. I'll be there in less than 2 minutes. In the back row of the massive room, Jeremiah Carter sat in a folding chair, wearing a cheap suit and sunglasses. Beside him was a duffel bag. Inside, a long-range transmitter and the cloned backup drives. His badge read, Vendor, Lighting Consultant. No one gave him a second glance. On stage, Douglas Winters stood behind the curtain. His hands were clasped behind his back. His bespoke suit was immaculate, and the glint in his eyes masked the paranoia swimming beneath. "Where's Ethan?" he asked sharply. "Running final checks," replied a nervous aide. Douglas looked toward the press seats. His eyes narrowed. Something felt off. He had activated Red Level 2 days earlier, unleashed his hitman Cole Vance, and wiped every trace of Emily from the company system. But still, a sliver of unease coiled around his gut. Meanwhile, Savannah King sat disguised among a group of independent journalists. Her laptop was open on her lap, one hand resting on the enter key, the other gripping a stack of folders. The moment Raymond gave the signal, she would launch simultaneous lawsuits, send data packets to watchdog agencies, and ignite a media frenzy that no amount of money could contain. Raymond Liu, seated inside a surveillance van parked a block away, monitored multiple screens. His fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between code streams and live camera feeds. All systems are stable. Emily, insert the USB into port A9 now. You've got 90 seconds. Emily reached the side panel. With a subtle flick of her wrist, she pulled the small silver USB from her sleeve and slipped it into the designated port. No one saw it. Not the stage crew. Not the tech monitors. The screen flickered. A small confirmation prompt flashed across her tablet. Sync in progress. Authenticating. 84%. Douglas walked out onto the stage to thunderous applause. Behind him, the giant LED screen lit up with the merged logos of Winters Global and Garner Technologies. Cameras flashed. Investors leaned forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," Douglas began, "today marks not just a merger but a movement. A movement toward transparency, technology, and truth." Behind the scenes, Raymond's fingers paused. "Emily," he said, his voice tense, "data sync complete. Savannah, go." Savannah hit enter. Within seconds, every phone in the auditorium buzzed. A shared link spread like wildfire, auto-opening across devices. The screen behind Douglas stuttered. Then, without warning, the company logos vanished, replaced by a new image. A folder labeled, Field 0. The audience gasped. Douglas froze. "Cut the feed," he barked at the tech booth. But it was too late. Emails began to auto-scroll across the screen, correspondence between Douglas and high-level staff plotting the forced bankruptcies of minority farms. One message read, "Carter Farms is resisting. Push the credit downgrade and initiate warehouse pricing strategy." Another email. "Field 0 launch Q3. Target, 112 independent farms. Must eliminate co-op competition before midterms." Jeremiah's name was right there, highlighted in red. A farmer. A risk. A target. Gasps turned into shouts. Cameras pivoted. Reporters stood. One yelled, "Mr. Winters, can you explain this internal plan to wipe out black-owned farms?" Douglas's face drained of color. A second screen appeared, financial spreadsheets and highlighted payment transfers to 3 federal judges. Below that, another file. Clearwave Capital, $1.2 million to education fund. Memo. Florida governor secured. "No," Douglas hissed. "This is fake. This is doctored." But then, a video started playing. Emily's face filled the screen. Composed. No makeup. No script. "My name is Emily Winters. I was born into a lie. My father taught me power meant control, not justice. But I refused to inherit a kingdom built on theft." Gasp. Murmurs. Phones recording. Streaming. "The data you see is real. And I take full responsibility for delivering it. No more silence. Not for money. Not for family. Not for fear." Douglas slammed the podium with his fist. "Turn it off. Shut it all down." Security guards looked at each other, uncertain. Raymond's voice came through the earpieces. "System lockdown complete. They can't cut the feed. And they can't trace the source." Outside, FBI vehicles rolled up quietly. Inside, Savannah stepped forward, holding her badge aloft. Savannah King, Special Counsel to the U.S. Department of Justice. "Mr. Douglas Winters, you are under investigation for financial fraud, racketeering, bribery, and civil rights violations. Please come with us." Douglas looked around, at the flashing cameras, the stunned investors, the daughter who had just detonated his empire. He hissed like a cornered snake, his voice cracking. You think this is over? I am the system. Jeremiah Carter stood, stepping out of the shadows of the back row. He walked down the aisle calmly, stopping at the foot of the stage. I don't need to beat you, he said evenly. I just needed you to stop. Douglas turned to security, but they backed away. You lost, Emily said. Not because we outpowered you, but because we told the truth. And no amount of money can buy silence forever. Chicago's skyline glittered like the crown of a kingdom that had never been challenged. Billboards screamed corporate mantras: innovation, integrity, impact, as if they could whitewash the sins buried beneath boardroom floors. Inside the Granville Convention Center, preparations buzzed like a well-oiled machine. VIPs, investors, media figures, and political operatives were pouring in for the grand event, Winters Global's acquisition of Garner Technologies. On paper, it was a merger of two tech giants. In reality, it was Douglas Winters' final move to consolidate data power across every agricultural, government, and defense sector. A chokehold disguised as progress. And hidden among the staff and crowd were the four people who had come to blow it all up. Emily Winters adjusted the earpiece in her ear as she walked briskly down the hall in a gray blazer and black slacks. She looked the part, confident, composed, invisible. Her forged badge labeled her as a technical media assistant for Garner Technologies. Emily, confirm visual access to port A9, came Raymond's voice through her earpiece. She scanned the control booth at the side of the main auditorium and nodded, keeping her expression blank. Confirmed. I'll be there in less than 2 minutes. In the back row of the massive room, Jeremiah Carter sat in a folding chair, wearing a cheap suit and sunglasses. Beside him was a duffel bag. Inside, a long-range transmitter and the cloned backup drives. His badge read, Vendor, Lighting Consultant. No one gave him a second glance. On stage, Douglas Winters stood behind the curtain. His hands were clasped behind his back. His bespoke suit was immaculate, and the glint in his eyes masked the paranoia swimming beneath. Where's Ethan? He asked sharply. Running final checks, replied a nervous aide. Douglas looked toward the press seats. His eyes narrowed. Something felt off. He had activated Red Level 2 days earlier, unleashed his hitman Cole Vance, and wiped every trace of Emily from the company system. But still, a sliver of unease coiled around his gut. Meanwhile, Savannah King sat disguised among a group of independent journalists. Her laptop was open on her lap, one hand resting on the enter key, the other gripping a stack of folders. The moment Raymond gave the signal, she would launch simultaneous lawsuits, send data packets to watchdog agencies, and ignite a media frenzy that no amount of money could contain. Raymond Liu, seated inside a surveillance van parked a block away, monitored multiple screens. His fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between code streams and live camera feeds. All systems are stable. Emily, insert the USB into port A9 now. You've got 90 seconds. Emily reached the side panel. With a subtle flick of her wrist, she pulled the small silver USB from her sleeve and slipped it into the designated port. No one saw it. Not the stage crew. Not the tech monitors. The screen flickered. A small confirmation prompt flashed across her tablet. Sync in progress. Authenticating. 84%. Douglas walked out onto the stage to thunderous applause. Behind him, the giant LED screen lit up with the merged logos of Winters Global and Garner Technologies. Cameras flashed. Investors leaned forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Douglas began, today marks not just a merger but a movement. A movement toward transparency, technology, and truth. Behind the scenes, Raymond's fingers paused. Emily, he said, his voice tense, data sync complete. Savannah, go. Savannah hit enter. Within seconds, every phone in the auditorium buzzed. A shared link spread like wildfire, auto-opening across devices. The screen behind Douglas stuttered. Then, without warning, the company logos vanished, replaced by a new image. A folder labeled, Field 0. The audience gasped. Douglas froze. Cut the feed, he barked at the tech booth. But it was too late. Emails began to auto-scroll across the screen, correspondence between Douglas and high-level staff plotting the forced bankruptcies of minority farms. One message read, Carter Farms is resisting. Push the credit downgrade and initiate warehouse pricing strategy. Another email. Field 0 launch Q3. Target, 112 independent farms. Must eliminate co-op competition before midterms. Jeremiah's name was right there, highlighted in red. A farmer. A risk. A target. Gasps turned into shouts. Cameras pivoted. Reporters stood. One yelled, "Mr. Winters, can you explain this internal plan to wipe out black-owned farms?" Douglas's face drained of color. A second screen appeared, financial spreadsheets and highlighted payment transfers to 3 federal judges. Below that, another file. Clearwave Capital, $1.2 million to education fund. Memo. Florida governor secured. "No," Douglas hissed. "This is fake. This is doctored." But then, a video started playing. Emily's face filled the screen. Composed. No makeup. No script. "My name is Emily Winters. I was born into a lie. My father taught me power meant control, not justice. But I refused to inherit a kingdom built on theft." Gasp. Murmurs. Phones recording. Streaming. "The data you see is real. And I take full responsibility for delivering it. No more silence. Not for money. Not for family. Not for fear." Douglas slammed the podium with his fist. "Turn it off. Shut it all down." Security guards looked at each other, uncertain. Raymond's voice came through the earpieces. "System lockdown complete. They can't cut the feed. And they can't trace the source." Outside, FBI vehicles rolled up quietly. Inside, Savannah stepped forward, holding her badge aloft. "Savannah King, Special Counsel to the U.S. Department of Justice. Mr. Douglas Winters, you are under investigation for financial fraud, racketeering, bribery, and civil rights violations. Please come with us." Douglas looked around, at the flashing cameras, the stunned investors, the daughter who had just detonated his empire. He hissed like a cornered snake, his voice cracking. "You think this is over? I am the system." Jeremiah Carter stood, stepping out of the shadows of the back row. He walked down the aisle calmly, stopping at the foot of the stage. "I don't need to beat you," he said evenly. "I just needed you to stop." Douglas turned to security, but they backed away. "You lost," Emily said. "Not because we outpowered you, but because we told the truth. And no amount of money can buy silence forever." Douglas Winters didn't scream as they placed the cuffs around his wrists. He seethed. Every vein in his neck throbbed with the suppressed rage of a man who had controlled senators, bulldozed communities, and crushed anyone who dared to oppose him for 30 years. But in that moment, under the searing gaze of journalists and activists and a daughter he never truly understood, he had no weapons left. No words could hide the ledger of lies and blood printed in full color on the 40-foot LED screen behind him. 2 federal agents guided him down the stage steps. As he passed, his eyes locked with Jeremiah Carter's. That look, the same one Jeremiah had seen years ago when Douglas stood on TV bragging about revolutionizing agriculture, wasn't one of fear. It was disbelief. That a nobody had stood up. That a farmer with nothing left could bring down the man who once owned everything. "I built this country," Douglas hissed, his voice shaking. "You think this will last?" Jeremiah didn't flinch. "I don't need it to last. I just needed you to fall." The agents pulled Douglas away. As the doors closed behind him, the roar of the crowd outside grew louder. Protesters had gathered, holding up signs that read, "Land is life, Field 0 equals genocide, and we are the voice now." Inside the convention hall, chaos surged like a flood. Investors scrambled to distance themselves. Phones buzzed nonstop. Social media exploded with clips of the video, the data dump, the arrest. Hashtags like #WintersCollapse and #JusticeIsPlanted trended worldwide. But Jeremiah, Emily, Savannah, and Raymond didn't stay to watch the aftershocks. They slipped out through a service corridor, avoiding the press and police. Emily still wore her assistant's blazer, but there was nothing timid about her now. Her eyes were clear, her shoulders squared. In the back alley behind the convention center, Savannah opened the Jeep's trunk and passed out burner phones. "That's it," she said. "We're ghosts again." Raymond added, "All server nodes confirmed. Estonia, Brazil, Iceland, they're already mirroring the data in timed intervals. Even if the DOJ tries to bury it, the truth is out there now. Forever." Emily leaned against the brick wall, breathing hard. "My father's going to try something. A legal maneuver, a corporate pivot. He'll claw at anything." "No," Savannah said firmly. "He's done. And more importantly, he's seen. That's what changes systems. Not just courtrooms. But shame." Jeremiah nodded. The empire wasn't built on paperwork. It was built on people not being able to fight back. Today we fought back. They didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no dramatic speeches. Just a silence that tasted like resolve. 3 days later, Winter's global stock lost 72% of its value. Within a week, the board resigned. International agencies launched coordinated investigations. Countries like Singapore, Switzerland, and Panama froze offshore accounts tied to the company. U.S. Congress convened emergency hearings. A dozen state attorneys general filed lawsuits. But the real shift wasn't just in headlines or markets. It was in the lives of the people once crushed under Field Zero. In Alabama, Carter Family Farms, once a forgotten patch of dirt, was designated a protected historical site. A grassroots cooperative of black and indigenous farmers pooled microloans to revive it, using Jeremiah's guidance and Savannah's legal scaffolding. In Louisiana, a man named Darnell Bates, who had lost his land in 2004, finally received restitution and the deed to his father's land back. And in Texas, a Navajo girl named Lena, daughter of a farmer blacklisted by a Winters subsidiary, received a scholarship from the newly launched Ellelaner Social Justice Fund. Named after Emily's grandmother, the only person in her life who had ever told her that power without conscience becomes cruelty. Emily refused all inheritance. She sold her stake in Winters Global and used the proceeds to fund legal clinics, farmland restoration programs, and scholarships. When asked by a journalist why she didn't just move on, she said, "Because silence is comfortable. And I've had enough comfort." Raymond Liu, now publicly exonerated, launched a decentralized evidence protection network for whistleblowers. He called it Ghost Root, an encrypted digital soil where truth could grow without fear of being chopped down. Savannah King became one of the most feared civil attorneys in the country. Not because of her courtroom victories, but because of her ability to mobilize the unheard into unified, unstoppable coalitions. And Jeremiah? He didn't return to farming. He built something bigger. The Horizon Farms Initiative, a nonprofit that gave land back to displaced farmers, trained young people in sustainable agriculture, and challenged discriminatory lending practices head-on. He said in an interview, "Justice doesn't come from courtrooms alone. Justice is when a black child can plant something, grow it, and know no one's coming to steal it." No marble statues were built. No best-selling books published. But across the South, across forgotten towns and hollowed-out communities, something stirred. A different kind of seed had been planted. And it was growing. 6 months after Douglas Winters was led away in handcuffs, the world was a different place. Not because the powerful had vanished, but because the powerless had stood up. In Atlanta, the Voices Reclaimed conference was in full swing. The audience wasn't made up of celebrities or corporate darlings. It was filled with small-town organizers, student leaders, farmers, whistleblowers, and the people who'd once been treated as collateral damage by a system built to ignore them. The final award of the evening, Rebuilder of the Year, was presented to a man who had once been written off as obsolete. A failed farmer. A cautionary tale of rural decline. His name was Jeremiah Carter. He walked slowly onto the wooden stage wearing a clean but humble brown suit. The sleeves were a little too short, the collar a little worn. His eyes scanned the room, not with arrogance but with quiet wonder. He spotted Emily in the front row, sitting beside Savannah and Raymond. All three gave small, proud nods. When the applause died down, Jeremiah stepped to the microphone. "I'm not here because I'm the smartest," he began, his voice gravelly and sure. "I didn't graduate from an Ivy League school. I never made $1 million. Most of my life I only had two things, my hands and the land they worked." Pause. "But when they took that land, when they took my name off the title and called it Progress, I thought maybe I was done." He looked at the audience, many nodding quietly, deeply. "But then I realized, maybe being stripped down is the only way to find out what you're really made of. And maybe, just maybe, those who've been ignored the longest are the ones who understand justice the best." The crowd erupted in applause, but he raised his hand gently to quiet them. "I want to tell you a secret," he continued. "Everything changed, not when I got angry. Not even when I got proof. Everything changed when I chose not to lock the trunk." Some murmured. Others nodded knowingly. "See, there was a moment, back when I didn't know who Emily was. I could have closed the tailgate. I could have let fear win. But I didn't. And it wasn't because I was brave. It was because something in me still believed that kindness matters. Even when it's dangerous. Even when it's not convenient. Even when it's not returned." In the crowd, Emily wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands clenched in her lap. "So here's what I want y'all to remember," Jeremiah said. "Justice isn't a courtroom. It's not a fancy word in a contract. Justice starts when someone says, 'I see you. I hear you. And I won't let you be erased.' He stepped back from the mic as the room stood to its feet. The ovation lasted a full 2 minutes. Later that night, on the 18th floor balcony of a hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, Jeremiah and Emily stood side by side, mugs of tea in their hands, silence between them, but a different kind of silence now. Not heavy, not strained, but peaceful. Beneath them, the city pulsed with life, its noise, its momentum, its endless appetite. But up here the quiet meant something else: completion. Emily leaned on the railing, hair tucked behind one ear. "You think this all started when I ran from my father?" she asked. Jeremiah smiled softly. "No. It started when you didn't lock the trunk." She turned to him, surprised. "That's when the world changed," he said. "When one scared girl decided to trust a stranger. And when that stranger decided to trust back." Emily looked out over the city, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was raised to believe power came from owning everything, controlling everything. But I think real power comes when you choose to let go." Jeremiah nodded. "And when you choose to build, not just tear down." They stood like that for a while, two souls who had nothing in common but a shared belief in something rare: that the truth still matters. That courage doesn't have to be loud. That justice grows best in silence when watered by action. And that the smallest choices, whether to open a door, whether to speak up, whether to trust, can rewrite the future. Not for headlines. Not for profit. But for people. Ordinary people who'd spent their whole lives being told they didn't matter, finally stepping into the light and saying, "We're still here. And we're not going anywhere." That was the story of Jeremiah Carter and Emily Winters, two strangers who refused to stay silent. They didn't fight back with weapons or wealth. They used truth, trust, and one simple act of courage. Because sometimes the future isn't rewritten in a courtroom. It starts the moment someone chooses not to lock the trunk. In a world where power is often used to silence the truth, this story reminds us that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to trust, when no one else would. Justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins when we choose to listen to the voices that were never supposed to speak. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video. Your voice might be the one that echoes next.